Hello and welcome to the Power Pod. I'm your host, Matthew Cohen, and today I am honored to be joined by Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, who is Israel's Special Envoy for Trade and Innovation. She also happened to be the former deputy mayor of Jerusalem and the co-founder of the UAE Israel Business Council. Fleur, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Thank you for having me, Matthew. Yes, we're good. We're good. Apart from everything else going on in the region, we might be in an impending third world war, but apart from that, we're all good.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you're good at present. And of course, what you've just spoken about is exactly the sort of topic we're going to be covering today. So jumping straight into it, I actually think it would be good for us to start by talking a little bit about Iran. So we've seen how the internet blackout over there has already exceeded about 300 hours. That's according to NetBlocks. And there were reports this morning, as of this time of this recording, that there were several armed militias spotted in Tehran. It's believed that they were deployed by Hezbollah or the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces, depending on which reports you read. And apparently they had multiple Toyota pickups driving around Tehran mounted with heavy machine guns and other heavy weaponry. And so I'd like to know, Fleur, given that there seems to have been this hesitance on the part of the US to act, and of course it seems as if the violence against civilians is ramping up, do you believe that Israel has a role to play in assisting the civilians on the ground? Or alternatively, do you think that Israel may need to urge the US to take action?
Honestly, Matthew, I think that Israel's done so much already to get to this point to help liberate the Iranian people. So remember, I just want to do a little recap so people understand what we're dealing with. In April 2024, Iran attacked Israel unprovoked through the night with 300 missiles. They weren't ballistic, but they were missiles. Again in September, they did the same thing, 24. Then the last summer, July 25, Israel retaliated. And we had one aim, and the aim was not, unfortunately, because I would have preferred if the aim was regime change. For us, the aim was the destruction or the pushing back of the nuclear ambitions, the nuclear development of weapons, because that poses an existential threat to Israel. It's not that we're paranoid. They've said it. They wanted the destruction of the state of Israel, and they're building a weapon of mass destruction. So I think any self-respecting country who wants a future would have done what Israel did. Now, at the same time, when we did that, we also got rid of a lot of the leadership, really a big chunk of their leadership. We got rid of all of their nuclear scientists practically, and a lot of the members of the IRGC. So Israel laid the groundwork for what's going on right now for the people to be able to stand up. Because of course that led to more economic issues. The economic issues just exacerbate the, currencies in free fall. But ultimately, people, 90 million people, the majority of them, 80% of them want freedom. And they're done with this repressive regime that basically doesn't even worry or bother about its own people to make sure that they have food and water. The most basic things the government need to do for their people is food and water. And they don't do that because they're busy sending money to Hezbollah. They've sent $1 billion to Hezbollah since we managed to kill Nasrallah. And so this regime is just living for itself now and for propping up its brutality. So I'm not surprised that there's militias on the street with machine guns gunning down people. We've heard terrible witness statements of the fact that they're just indiscriminately killing women and children on the street, that they've put thousands and thousands of people in jail. People want freedom, and this regime cannot continue because it's not just a threat to its own people. It's not just a threat to the region and Israel, of course. It's a threat to the entire world. Today, there is a Hitler alive and well in Tehran, and people haven't woken up to that fact yet. They haven't woken up to the fact that we're in a civilizational war with fundamentalist Islam, jihadi Islam, Islamism, political Islam, and they have made a lot of gains. Now, Hezbollah and Hamas, all part of that same strategy. We've managed to push that back very significantly, but we can't fight a civilizational war for the planet, for the world on our own. We need the world's superpower to finish the job, but we certainly have laid the groundwork and the infrastructure for this regime change that hopefully will happen sooner rather than later.
Right. And on that note, given your experience and understanding of what's going on the ground, do you believe that the US could still be intervening in some way or other in the not too distant future? How do you read into that whole situation?
I think they will. I think they will join. I think they're getting ready. What I've been reading lately and hearing from experts is that nobody was ready for the backlash of going in and trying to get rid of the IRGC and the Islamic Republic's leadership. And that's what's going on right now. There's one theory that says, look, we didn't do it then because the backlash would have been more than we can cope with. And so we need to get all our ducks in a row before we actually do this. I mean, America does this with our help, of course. The second theory is that they're going to try diplomacy. But, I just feel that it's so ridiculous. It's like saying to Hitler, listen, stop this concentration camp stuff you're doing and let's just, hash it out. You can't. The nature of the regime is one of repression, suppression. Sharia law, which gives no rights to women or LGBTQ members of the community, nothing. They have no future with this current regime. No future. It does not invest in its people. It kills its people. They don't care about their people. Ideology for them, and in this case, a very toxic death ideology, is more important than people. And so when you're dealing with a regime like that, there's only one way, and that's out the door. They've got to go.
Right, of course. And what you actually said about sitting around the table, that sort of traditional diplomacy really echoes memories of what happened in World War
Yes.
II, right? Where you sort of had Neville Chamberlain coming up
Yeah.
the stairs with
Yeah.
effectively a piece of paper saying peace in our time. And
Yeah.
we all know how that turned out. So
Exactly. You can't, like Churchill warned the world about Hitler, and he was right. Israel's been shouting out about the Islamic regime of Iran for years. Netanyahu has made it his main priority. And ultimately, people have to understand how dangerous the main exporters of terrorism around the world is them. And they're not just killing or trying to kill Israelis and Jews. They're killing Americans. They're killing French people. They're killing everyone. But most of all, they're killing their own people. They're talking about 20,000 dead. It wouldn't surprise me if it was more, because the media blackouts there for a reason. And so there's only one way that this can end well. And that is for the regime to be brought down and for people to have this transitional leader, Reza Pahlavi, and perhaps create a constitutional monarchy and then usher in democracy. And it can work because the Persians have a history of civilization. They're an ancient people like the Jewish people. I think we're the last two ancient peoples left. And so we've got to help these people have the chance at having a decent life and a future for their children. And also have the region have a decent future, because they are not just threatening us, they're threatening the Sunni moderate monarchies like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar's in their back pocket as well. These are bad people. This is Hitler, Mussolini, and everything in between.
of course. You did mention Reza Pahlavi, the exiled crown prince of Iran from the previous monarchy. And I would actually like your opinion on him, because there have been quite a few conflicting opinions on whether or not he is suited to lead. But I guess the big question would be, who is the alternative leadership? So in your view, as someone who's been...
Yeah, I think you've answered your own question. Ultimately,
Right.
and no, in the sense that the answer's in your question, because maybe he is and maybe he isn't. That's not the point. The point is that when you bring down one government, one ruling faction, you need an alternative. And at the moment, Reza Pahlavi is the alternative. Now, Reza Pahlavi seems like an incredibly lovely guy. He seems like a benevolent leader. Maybe he can't be the prime minister or the president because he doesn't have those skills or that grit. Maybe. I'm not saying he's supposed to be ruling Iran forever. What I'm saying is that even if in transition, and he said this himself, I will be the transitional leader to usher in a new era of democracy. People need a name to shout out. They need a hope, because a vacuum is not good. A vacuum only serves the bad guys. And so, I don't know enough about Reza Pahlavi. He's been to Israel. I know he will be a very friendly ally for us, and we're very excited about that. People love him in the diaspora. The Iranians love him, and I trust my diaspora friends. But now you see what you've never seen before. People in Iran, people on the streets shouting out his name. And so for that reason, if America can support him and support this transitional government, then I think the future can be very bright for Iran. And yes, he's the man of the moment because he's here and he's the one who's been lobbying for his own people with the biggest superpower in the world.
Right. So I guess it's a issue of practicality being the only viable alternative to what is currently installed in Iran.
Yeah.
But you used the word transitional government quite a lot, and that really got me thinking, because of course there seems to be another transitional government that could be taking place, specifically in Israel's own backyard, in Gaza.
Yeah.
And so for those who might not be entirely up to date, the US announced phase 2 of the ongoing Gaza peace deal a few days ago. And it was announced this morning that Israel has accepted Trump's invitation to join the Gaza Peace Council, which is the oversight body of this project.
Yeah.
And there have also been concerns within Israel, however, that by joining this, you're kind of condoning what's going on, because quite a number of people have aired concerns over the potential involvement of Qatari and Turkish officials in the process. And then, of course, there's the other issue, which is the fact that Israel's preconditions for advancing to the second phase haven't entirely been met. We know that Israel has asked for the return of all hostages from Gaza. However, unfortunately, the remains of the deceased Ran Gvili have still not been recovered. And so this has not been met, unfortunately. And so given these circumstances, Fleur, I'd really like to know, do you believe that Netanyahu or the Israeli government at large is making the right call by joining the Gaza Peace Council? Or do you think that this could be a strategic error?
Look, I don't think we have much of a choice, let's be honest. Trump ultimately has proven to have been very effective. He got the 20 living hostages home, which honestly, I never thought would happen. I never thought Hamas would give up their leverage in that way. And they did. And yes, Ran Gvili, who has to be brought home for a dignified burial, has to come home. But the second phase is also about disarming Hamas. Now, do I believe that Qatar and Turkey have what it takes, or even the desire to disarm the terrorists that they have been funding and they have been encouraging and they have been advocating for? No. But it's very unclear who's doing what in this board of peace, because there seems to be 4 or 5 different committees. There's the big kind of symbolic board and then the executive board. The executive board, from what I can see, doesn't have Turkey and Qatar. Turkey and Qatar are more in kind of the symbolic board. So I don't know. Look, I always approach these things with a lot of humility, because whatever we hear is probably only half the story. You know, we don't know what's really going on. The public doesn't know what's going on. And I'm a quasi-diplomat. We certainly don't know what's going on, because this is all on the very, very secretive level of the highest type of security clearance. But I trust that if the government has joined, it's because they've gotten enough assurances from the Americans that the fox won't be put in charge of the chickens, which means that Qatar and Turkey are not going to be the people who are going to decide, to keep Hamas in some way. I've heard a lot of criticisms about this board from many sides. So the Palestinians and the Hamas people are like, oh, why aren't we part of it? They're like, well, you lost the war. Imagine, I want to go back to the Second World War. Imagine some of the Nazis saying, well, why aren't we in the German reconstruction plan? You started a war, you lost it. That's what it means to lose a war. You're not involved in what things look like afterwards. Now, do I think Hamas is going to disarm so quickly? No. I mean, I wish they would. I don't know who's going to do that apart from Israeli soldiers. I don't see anybody's soldiers disarming Hamas. I don't see any international forces disarming Hamas. I'm very pleased the UN is not involved in this board of peace. And I think it's kind of Trump, poking them in the eye in a way. The EU, I don't think, is involved. And so a lot of the very non-productive and in some cases very destructive so-called mediators of the past are not involved. And I think that's a good thing. Do I like the fact that Qatar and Turkey are there? No. Do I think they're going to be helpful? No, they're going to be destructive and they're going to be counterproductive. But do I think that the Americans have enough power to kind of control things with us? Yes, I do. So let's see what happens.
Of course. And I'm glad that you also distinguish between the two different governing bodies, of course, that there is that symbolic one.
I think there's about 4 of them, you know. Nobody knows who's doing what, which I think that part of this non-clarity is probably quite deliberate.
No, of course. For all you know, they themselves don't even know what's going to happen yet.
Also, he asked people who want to join the Board of Peace to put in $1 billion. It's like he invited Putin to join the Board of Peace. I mean, in a little while, he'll probably be inviting Khamenei. So let's see what happens.
Well, Kazakhstan and Thailand have already been invited, so you might see Thai nationals running.
Do you imagine Thai soldiers trying to disarm Hamas? It's just.
I have nothing against them, but I don't see how practically.
I love the Thai people, but it's not going to happen, is it?
Definitely not. Definitely not, especially with the lack of insights on the region. And actually, I'm quite glad you brought up the UN as well, because we've noticed how, of course, there was the UN peacekeeping force along the Lebanon border.
Exactly. What did they do?
You still see
UNIFIL. They're useless.
Look the other way.
They look the other way. They were in bed with Hezbollah. This is what happens with these UN so-called peacekeeping forces. They're completely useless. Nobody's got skin in the game, and they're just scared. They're scared.
Of course. And we could actually argue that they empowered Hezbollah, because to this day you see. Yeah, I mean, you see,
and they were even dishonest. They could come back and they've said, listen, we can't cope, but look what's going on. That was their job, to enforce a resolution to keep them north of the Litani River. They could have said, look, we can't deal with these people, but they are advancing. They didn't even say that. They were so dishonest.
Of course. I mean, even the Lebanese army's now decided, well, we better step up and be honest. Hence why they're going to France and Saudis and even the US in February, if I'm not mistaken. So.
Well, the US cancelled their last trip because they're not doing enough to disarm Hezbollah. And the US have said to them, if you don't disarm Hezbollah, if you don't step up, we're going to wash our hands from you, and then we're going to let Israel do whatever the hell they want. So they're worried now.
Of course, and rightfully so. But there is actually an aspect to all of this that I feel like doesn't get covered enough. And I think you're probably the perfect person to ask, right? Which is specifically the trade side of things. So you, of course, co-founded the UAE Israel Business Council, and you've really overseen, well, firsthand how trade between the two countries has progressed, especially since the Abraham Accords.
Yeah.
Fleur. So I'm very curious to know, do you believe that all of this, what's going on in Gaza, what's gone on in Lebanon, Iran, do you believe that it has affected relations with the UAE and perhaps other Abraham Accords partners from the trade perspective?
Well, from the trade perspective, it doesn't look like it's had a big effect. Okay, so in 2025, I don't think we have the numbers quite in, but at end of 2024, it was almost $3.5 billion in trade between Israel and the UAE, which was already 15-20% up from the previous year. 2025 was a very good year also for trade, where you see an increase. And Israel is now our defense exports 15% of the market share of our defense exports are done with the UAE. So it hasn't really affected trade. It might have slowed it down a bit. It could have been much bigger, maybe. What the October the 7th massacre did, and what it intended to do all along, was to stop the impending peace with Saudi Arabia. That was on the books. That was going to happen. And I mean, it's very clear. They also found evidence. Hamas, they found documents in Gaza that the timing of the 7th of October was there just to stop the agreement that Israel was about to sign with Saudi Arabia. So that's definitely been pushed back a little bit. But, and also I will say that for the last 2 years, it's been very difficult to conduct any type of people to people stuff with the Gulf countries because they're in a very delicate position. They're Muslim countries, albeit they are moderate Sunni, and the kings have made the UAE and Bahrain, and Morocco, they've made a strategic decision to have peace with Israel. And they've actually been quite steadfast in not kind of capitulating to the pressures of the world. For one main reason, they understand that the biggest threat to the world and to themselves is Islamic fundamentalism, Muslim Brotherhood, represented by Hamas, as it is by the Houthis and by Hezbollah Shias, but, by other elements in the region.
Right.
They know they have the same threat as us. So they've been very strategic. They've been a bit cold, but now I'm beginning to feel like ties are warming up again. We're having a little bit more events. We had a few delegations here in the last few months. So I think things are definitely warming up again. And with Morocco, trade is going very well. And so I'm very optimistic for the future. And I think that if we can just get over this hump of what's going to happen to Gaza, then I'm very optimistic that Saudi, or at least even countries like Indonesia, it's the largest Muslim country in the world. Half of the country want to make peace with us already. Half of the country is, they've got a fundamentalism problem. But I think that there's a lot of countries that will definitely want to join the Abraham Accords. And what's the practical expression of that is something called the IMEC corridor, which is basically a transport and logistic corridor all the way from India, Saudi Arabia, to the region, through Jordan to Israel, connecting essentially the East with the West, the Arab world, the entire region with Europe. And that's, that there's a lot of, America is very involved in that. And there's a lot of talk about that. It's a very optimistic development.
Right. Well, that certainly is a welcome development if that proves correct. I think that certainly if trade can continue, and not only continue but grow, that would certainly be welcome, not only for the Israelis but the entire region. And it's really interesting to hear your perspective, Fleur, because it seems that what a lot of the Arab countries do in terms of their political statements on the face of things versus the way they actually behave are quite different. You know, because we saw how. Sorry,
you've hit the nail on the head, Matthew. This is something I talk about a lot. I always say that in this region, there's rhetoric and there's reality. Rhetoric is the bravado. We have to attack Israel because the Palestinian cause plays well on the Muslim street. And ultimately, the public there is Muslim, and they've been indoctrinated for many years. They've got Al Jazeera. The press is so toxic against Israel. BBC Arabia, which is almost worse than Al Jazeera. And then you've got reality, which is that these people understand where the real threats are. The leaders understand that Israel's not a threat, that the real threat are the Islamic fundamentalists. And so, yes, you hit the nail on the head. There is what we say in public and what we do in private. Now, I will say, and this is where I think gives me a lot of optimism. When Iran attacked us in April 24, and then again in September 24, the next day we had the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Jordan saying that they'd helped us that night repel those attacks. And I always say the miracle is not that they helped us. The miracle is that they admitted that they helped us. And that's why. And that's a good sign.
No, of course. I mean, especially when it goes into defense in that way, potentially life-saving defense. And then, of course, you also see how look at Egypt. The entire time throughout the war, there was all the drama around the Rafah crossing, the sort of mistreatment of Palestinians that they don't want to let them in. But at the same time, you see the historic gas deal that's just been signed between Israel and Egypt.
Exactly. We've signed a gas deal for 30 years. Do you understand? 30 years. This is the same country that says down the people or the kids are studying down with Israel, down with Israel. So why are you signing a 30-year agreement for gas? So that's what I'm saying. Rhetoric and reality are two very different things in this region.
Of course. So just to summarize your assessment of what's going on, would you say that you are optimistic about where Israel's future is headed within the broader Middle East and North Africa?
Look, I have to be optimistic. In this country, you have to be optimistic because otherwise we can. And I'm an optimistic person by nature. After October 7th, a lot of that was kind of eaten away by the most horrible things that we've ever experienced. We never thought we would experience in our own sovereign country. So a little bit of my kind of positive energy and optimism did wane for quite a while, but I'm back to being optimistic about the future. Because the Middle East is splitting into two: the countries that want peace and prosperity, and the countries that want Islamism and destruction. And I think that there's more that if you see two sides of the scale, more countries eventually will want peace and prosperity. And Israel is, of course, the leading light in this region of innovation and talent and prosperity. We are a prosperity engine in the region. We've also dealt with a lot of the regional challenges that a lot of these countries are only waking up to now, like food sustainability, water sustainability, things that Israel had to work out a long time ago because we didn't have neighbors to trade with. And so I'm very optimistic about that. I'm optimistic that with this American government, we can really push forward the peace prosperity plans that Trump was talking about in his first administration. I'm very optimistic about that. And I think what people don't seem to understand is that the main blockage of prosperity and calm and quiet and just people being able to realize their potentials, especially in the new era of AI, which Israel, of course, will be leading because we have the highest concentration of AI talent in the world is in this country. That's why I'm optimistic. But I think that when people realize that what's stopping that is this kind of very toxic culture of Islamic fundamentalism, of political Islam, and more people wake up to it, as people are waking up when they see what's going on in Iran. If Iran, and please God, when Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran falls, that you will know, Matthew, that we're firmly into the day after, and the world will now jump on the bandwagon of peace and prosperity rather than Islamic fundamentalism. I just hope that in Europe they're on time to not be completely swallowed up.
Of course, for sure. So, Fleur, thank you very much for your time today. For those who are listening and would like to hear a little bit more about what you have to say, where can people find you?
Well, I'm on social media like everyone else is. So I've got a X account and an Instagram account, Facebook. I'm not on TikTok yet. They didn't get me yet. I'm on LinkedIn. My handles are Fleur, Fleur Hassan with another N at the end, or Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, my full name. And you're welcome to follow me. I have my own podcast called The Quad, which is on JNS TV, and we do a weekly show. And so everybody's welcome to go and listen.
Perfect. And I will be happy to post a link in the description box below so that people can follow you there.
Thank you.
Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. I hope you found this discussion as insightful as I have. Be sure to follow Fleur and to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Fleur, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you. Until next time, I'm Matthew Cohen, and this is the Power Pod.